Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Louise Digby is a BANT registered nutritional therapist, weight loss expert, and the creator of the Nourish Method that helps women get their dream body, supercharge their energy, and overcome frustrating symptoms like bloating, bowel problems, skin complaints, and much more. She specializes in helping her clients understand how hormones and metabolism change over time, and this helps them avoid caloric restriction. Louise has helped hundreds of women discover and fix what's really keeping them from their goal weight: sluggish metabolism, imbalanced hormones, and mindset challenges. As the creator of the Nourish Method, her online program addresses the lifestyle factors that impact women's fat burning and the mindset challenges that causing self-sabotage. Louise is also the host of the Thriving Metabolism Podcast, created to guide and educate women about the nuances around metabolic health, hormones, gut health, and more in the context of weight loss. Her ultimate goal is to help women feel their best in the cycle of crash dieting, to actively enjoy choosing outfits every day, and most importantly, feel confident in their own skin. Louise Digby, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're really excited to host you. This is such a blind spot for me with coaching. We've hosted several episodes featuring experts in women's health and helping people, women in particular, with their hormones. It's just such a vexing problem. And as much as I want to finally invite somebody on the show to say, like, what should all women eat? Just tell us exactly what to eat and what to do and everything. I think your most favorite set of words is "it depends." It's so
Yes.
highly individual that as much as I want to find a one size fits all solution for everybody, that's just not really the case of how it works, is it?
Yeah, you've sussed me out immediately. I'm always saying it depends because it really is so individual. It very much depends on each person's current circumstances, their genetics, their schedule, their medical history, and everything that could be going on, medication, supplements. So many things need to be factored in to determine what is going to be the right way to eat or what type of exercise is going to suit them and all these other lifestyle things.
Yeah, well said. It almost feels like a cop out every time we have to say that. Like, it depends. I wish I had a better answer. And I also wish I could go back to the very first day that I got certified as a nutrition coach, because that was the day I knew everything about nutrition. And since then, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And I feel like I know less and less and less the more time that goes on.
Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one who feels like that then, because yeah, it really is a case of the more you get into it, the more you read and research, the less you feel like you know, or the less sure you feel about what the right approach is, because there is lots of compelling research for lots of different approaches and ways of eating and living. Um, and so, it's not surprising that people who haven't studied nutrition are confused because it's very easy to be misled and pulled along into something that sounds too good to be true. And more often than not, it is too good to be true.
That's a really good point, actually. Like, I really don't blame people, and I'm frankly surprised more people don't just throw up their hands and say, like, I don't this is so confusing to me. I'm just going to go back to eating pizza and drinking beer over the weekend or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it is very, very, very confusing for people out there. And yeah, I don't blame people for feeling like I'm just going to give up and eat the cake because I have no idea what anybody's talking about. It's so conflicting out there. It's really difficult to find the right information.
Yeah, and I think when you're in the thick of it and you're really trying your best to eat well because you're trying to optimize your health or lose weight or whatever your goals are, that's not the only thing that's going on in your life. There's, work and kids and all these other things going on. So you're going to get overwhelmed very easily. All this conflicting information it just makes it so difficult to make any progress at all.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I really love about your content is, yes, there's so many individual variables that we can dial in and we can get better at a lot of things and individualize things, like I said, but you have a lot of really good general advice that can pretty much help everybody in certain categories, and we can all understand that there's different ways to get there, but if we follow certain principles, like how you talk about, like, caloric restriction, for example, there's certain principles that if anybody follows, regardless of exactly the way they get there, even if it doesn't look like somebody else, the general principle can at least help guide a direction. So I really appreciate that about your content.
Yeah, definitely. I think that for most people, if we can just get some core foundations in place, or these core principles in place, then, we're gonna massively improve how we feel and how we age. And, if you really want to get into the the kind of health optimization side of things, that's when we start to need to get much more targeted and get into testing and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I love that. So I've really enjoyed your content. I really like your podcast. It's very straightforward. I like how the length of the episodes are really quite concise, and I love the way you manage that. But I'm actually not as familiar with your own personal story of how you got interested in health and nutrition to begin with. So I'd love to hear your own personal story of how you did get interested in all of that.
Yeah, well, for me, I went into studying nutrition straight from school or college over here. And my interest really came from my mum, who, she probably would have studied nutrition if she could have. So I was just brought up with probably a slightly better understanding of food than the average person just from her passion. And I always knew that I wanted to work with people and work in the realm of health. So nutrition really seemed like the obvious thing for me to do. And when I started practicing, I was working with everyone and anyone in terms of whatever goals they had or whatever conditions they had. All sorts of things like IBS and depression and fatigue and you name it really. But what I noticed was that pretty much everyone that had some sort of health goal also wanted to lose weight. So I kind of inadvertently ended up becoming fairly knowledgeable in that area. And then what I really noticed was that it was women who were in this mid stage of life, who were really in their late 30s, 40s, 50s, who were often the most disciplined and working the hardest, but seeing the worst results when it came to managing their weight and addressing all the symptoms and hormonal symptoms that can come up at this stage of life. Um, and so I really wanted to understand that a lot better and understand why those women were not seeing results despite, eating well, cutting their calories and doing loads of exercise. It just didn't make sense based on what we're typically taught about how to manage weight. So that's when I really went down the rabbit hole of understanding hormones better and their relationship with metabolism and weight, understanding, all the things that impact metabolism, and really how there is a hell of a lot more to health and weight management than just how much you eat and how much you exercise.
Okay. Well, you just somewhat answered the next question I was going to ask, which is when you reflect back on the training that you got as a registered nutritional therapist, how much of it would you say still holds true? And how much of it do you now reflect back on and say, like, wow, I think we were chasing the wrong horse, essentially?
I think a lot of my training does still hold true. I studied nutritional therapy, and on my course, we were very much, well, the tutors were very much shunning conventional medicine and very much working from a research perspective. Whereas I know other nutritionists who kind of did more mainstream courses, and their education was very different to mine. So I feel like a lot of mine has held up, but where there was a big disconnect was with weight loss, because that was treated as if in a very conventional way of it's a calorie calculation, it's calorie formula. And it was really disconnected to everything else that we were taught about health. We were taught about hormones and how to make the gut healthy and how to make the skin healthy and all these things, but it was never matched up with how all of these factors impact our metabolism, and how, for women, everything changes when they get into that midlife stage. So that side of things has been a learning curve for sure.
Gotcha. Okay. And you mentioned things like IBS, IBD. You mentioned depression. Were you aware at the time of your training that nutrition could help with those things, or was it like you were treating those things in a different way, but people needed weight loss, and so you would help them with the weight loss, and then that would help with the gut issues and the depression and mental issues as well? Or did you know back then that even like nutrition affected depression. Nutrition affects your gut health.
Yeah, I definitely knew that back then. My course was quite good in terms of helping us to understand how, food was medicine, and if we can make sure that we're eating things that align with our body's needs, then, things like depression and IBS and, really most conditions can be really positively impacted. I mean, we were always taught never to claim to be able to cure anyone or treat anyone, but a positive side effect of addressing the lifestyle factors and food factors is that most of these conditions that are really, really common tend to resolve.
That's pretty progressive. I would say even today, most medical professionals or people that study nutrition or become registered dietitians, they, even with things like IBS or IBD, it's surprising how few of them think that nutrition even plays a part. Like it seems like obviously, the medical community is trained in prescriptions and which pill to go after. It's funny that like digestive issues for a lot of people, they don't even consider that it could be the food.
Yeah, and it's really frustrating because like, I've worked with so many people who have had IBS and digestive issues and resolved it, managed to make a massive difference to their quality of life. And they've gone to their doctors and said, oh, I don't need, this medication anymore because I don't have those symptoms anymore. I resolved it with nutrition. And the doctors have almost laughed at them as if to say, it's got nothing to do with what you eat. What are you talking about? And I hear that all the time about all sorts of things. I mean, these days I work much more with women who are struggling with menopause, and that incorporates many different things, including gut issues. But the amount of times that women come to me and they've been told that there's nothing they can do, it's a case of you just got to live with it, or take some HRT, take some antidepressants, and you just got to ride it out.
It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. We just interviewed a pharmacist who got yelled at after she helped her patient get deprescribed on some medications. She got yelled at by the general practitioner, and as soon as the yelling was done, the lady was like, or the woman we interviewed, the pharmacist was like, "Okay, hold on. Like, why are you upset with me? I don't understand. We just took your patient off of medication, and it came out that like, well, now I just lost a patient, and that was the whole reason that the doctor was upset. It's like, what are we doing? Like, we're not helping people, and people aren't excited to get off of medications. Like, why are we doing this? It's crazy."
It's crazy that that isn't always the goal. I mean, I'm sure in some circumstances, medication is always going to be for life, but there are many, many circumstances where actually these things are reversible and we can get off medications.
I love that. You must feel so happy when you help get a client off of their medications. This must be the most wonderful thing. I think it's so under, it's just not talked about enough how many side effects these medications have. And yes, they can help for certain things. Yes, they might be helpful short term, like you mentioned, but the side effects that come along with these medications, like every medication has a side effect. And if you can get along better without it, we should be throwing you a parade. You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah.
so great.
Yeah, and yeah, I think that is one of the biggest things when we have a client who comes off medications, particularly, if it's a diabetes medication or blood pressure, cholesterol, those sorts of things, because that, they have really significant side effects that generally what happens is you start one medication, you end up with another medication for the side effects, and you just keep going and end up with this huge long list of meds. And I used to work in a pharmacy, and we would have people coming in every week to get their prescriptions filled, and they'd have just long lists of things. And it's just crazy how many medications there would be on. And every time they come in, there's a new one added to the list. And
Yes.
none of it's addressing what's actually going on, the root cause of the problems in the body.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, I'm really excited to talk about this topic, especially for women. I noticed it in men as well, but it seemed more prevalent in women. I spent over a decade working with a metabolic cart to help measure people's metabolic rates by measuring respirations. And so we had the software program. This is back in like 2007 when I started working with this. We had the software program that we could lay somebody down in a chair, measure how many calories they would burn at rest. We would have little sliders that would say, okay, you're this active during the day, you exercise this much. What's your goal? You want to lose weight or gain weight? Great. You want to lose a pound a week? Let's just move this slider up, which says you're going to exercise more. Then we're going to move this slider down that says you're going to eat a little bit less. whatever delta we need to make for a pound. A week of weight loss was 3,500 calories, which is 500 calories a day of a deficit. So whether that's 500 calories of exercise, 500 calories less of eating, or a combination of the two, and it would just give you a 1 pound weight loss per week, which you could do for as many weeks as you had pounds to lose. And then every time after a few weeks, when somebody would come back and they'd be failing, we would just sit around and say, wow, you really suck at following this advice. You should be exercising more. You're eating way too much. Again, like, can you explain the calories in, calories out theory? Why it is that if I go out on the street and ask 100 people how to lose weight, 99 of them would tell me they just need to eat less or they need to move more. Can you tell us why that idea is still around and why it's so deeply flawed?
Well, as to why it's still around, I think it's just because it is so deeply ingrained in what we're taught about not just weight loss, but just how to eat healthy. We're taught that if you're eating less and you're exercising more, or if you're in a calorie deficit, then you'll be healthier, you'll be superior in some way. And most diets, I'd say 99% of diets, perpetuate that in one way or another, whether they're talking about calories or whether they're talking about points. It's what is taught to doctors, even to nutritionists who are more mainstream. And so there's just no escaping it. But the reality is that it assumes that our metabolism is this static thing and that we're always burning the same amount of calories, and that if we just consume fewer calories, we're going to burn that same amount of calories, and therefore there's going to be a deficit. But that's just not how it works. Our bodies are so incredibly adaptive, and when we have fewer calories coming in than we need or than we usually have, your body just down regulates other bodily processes. You might produce less heat or conserve in other ways because your body really doesn't want you to waste away. So whether it's that you're eating less or whether it's that you're exercising more, your body will conserve energy so that there isn't this big calorie deficit. Part of the reason why it looks like it works initially is because you will likely lose some water weight. You might start losing some muscle because your body really doesn't want to burn fat. It will often start breaking down your muscle because it's a kind of more readily available resource. And then that in itself is detrimental because we can get into that in more detail, but muscle is so important for your metabolic rate. And generally what happens for most people is that they'll lose some weight by cutting the calories or exercising more. They can't stick with it because their body is screaming at them to eat more because they're missing out on everything they need, all the nutrients, because more often than not, a calorie deplete diet is lacking in nutritional value. So they'll end up falling off the wagon and they'll eat more. And when they regain the weight, they don't tend to regain the muscle that they've lost. They just regain fat. And so you might end up at the same weight that you were before, but your body fat percentage is higher, your muscle percentage is lower. And so your metabolism is slower. And then it's going to be even more difficult to lose the weight the next time around. So it really keeps people stuck on this yo-yoing long term.
It's awful. It's awful. And when I see people doing this, and I see that their bodies never really change, or if they do, it's a slight dip in weight, and they might be a different size, but not by much. And then you see the rebound. You just so desperately want to stop somebody and just say, like, for all your work, for everything you're doing, all the exercising, the huffing and puffing and breathing heavily and all this stuff, and then on the flip side, not consuming very many calories, you are causing your own weight gain. It's going to happen. You're fighting evolution. Like, the way we evolved, we didn't have calories available all the time, every day, 360 days out of the year, the way we do, especially with ultra processed foods that are delicious and amazing and the perfect combination of fats and salts and sugar and all this stuff. And it's like, if you just understood that you're literally fighting against your own evolution, it's so hard for people to understand that. But you mentioned heat, which I think is a wonderful indicator that you're going the wrong way. When you start feeling cold in your hands and feet when you're wearing a jacket in July, I'm willing to bet that you have been crashing your metabolism. You're probably doing way too much cardio and you're probably under eating.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Heat is a really great indicator, and energy levels as well, because ultimately the way that we burn fat, it's the way that we make energy. So if you're not burning efficiently, then you're going to start getting fatigued. And if you're finding that you're having to snack constantly to keep your blood sugars up, to stop you getting feeling faint and funny if you don't eat regularly, or if you're having energy slumps, there's lots of reasons why that can happen, but one of the reasons may be that you are just under fueling, especially if you're quite active.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, really well said. Let's start with the female who's not quite there. Let's say 20s, 30s, not really noticing the effect of that weight gain, but is concerned, especially with the number on the scale, is still stuck in the mentality of like, I want to keep my calories low. I want to be exercising a lot, in particular cardio, but not necessarily noticing problems just yet. We'll talk about somebody who is already on the other side of that and needs to recover their metabolism. But for somebody who is thinking about that and thinking like, wow, I don't want to go there, nutritionally, what are some of your key principles that you want somebody to be following early in life to make sure that they don't ever fall into that ditch?
So I would say never fall into the trap of what is often the default, which is when you feel like you're starting, if your clothes getting a bit tight or you feel like you've overdone it a bit, try not to fall into that trap of doing a diet and cutting everything out. You've got to really flip it on its head and start thinking about, what does my body need to thrive? The likelihood is that if you add in some more protein, then it's going to control your cravings. It's going to give you more energy. It's going to help preserve your muscle mass and fuel your workouts. And it just puts you on the front foot, because if you're adding that protein, it steadies out your blood sugars, which helps you to avoid craving the sweets and the carbs and those things that tend to not be so good for us and throw us off track. So I would say that is a really good place to start, instead of thinking about, right, let's cut out all the junk or cut out whatever. Just add in some protein, and then you'll likely make better food choices anyway.
Yeah, I like that. I think there's some debate about the protein leverage hypothesis that basically says like you'll keep eating energy in the form of fat or carbohydrates until you get a certain amount of protein. Again, I think there is a little bit of debate of whether that's exactly true or not, but I think practically most of us know that that is kind of the case. If you start eating things like chips and salsa, for example, like you never get full. Like processed foods, you just eat and eat and eat a pretty insane amount of calories and still be hungry. Or even if your stomach gets full, like you'll be hungry in like 2 hours. And the snackiness that you talked about, like that's a real problem for people. And I think getting that protein and making that a priority is such a great way to kind of postpone that and eliminate all that energy calories that people are intaking probably unnecessarily.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very difficult to overeat protein. Your body's very good at recognizing when it's had enough. We digest protein quite slowly, and so it keeps us fuller for longer. Our brain's very good at recognizing that, we're full when we've been eating protein. And it doesn't give us that massive blood sugar high that we would get if we were eating chips or whatever it might be. Um, and therefore we don't get the blood sugar crash that leads us to, even though we're probably feeling bloated and stuffed, seeking out the sweets and the chocolate and the things that tend to come afterwards.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so practically speaking, for like a guideline, do you have a general target that somebody should be getting as far as protein? Should they think about it like as a daily or weekly accumulation, or something they should focus on at every meal? Like, do you have any guidelines around protein that can let people know like somewhere in this ballpark is about right?
I generally tend to say about 20 to 30 grams per meal. Again, it does depend. It
There it
depends
is.
on the individual. But for most people, 20 to 30 grams per meal is usually a good amount.
Yeah, I would like to see it a little bit higher than that in some cases, but frankly, the protein accumulations that some people are getting are so shockingly low that I think that's a great target and at least a place to start. So I really like that. Let's talk about the females that again maybe aging down the road, but they are noticing those signs of a metabolic slowdown. They were so tempted by the calorie number on the treadmill or the elliptical, or they were doing the 6 classes a week that are pushing people way too hard and to very high intensities, and now they're noticing they feel sluggish, they feel cold, they have cravings, they are really feeling like they want to keep their weight down, but if they eat anything their body just wants to hoard all the calories they get. It's a terrible position to be in, and psychologically especially so difficult. So how do you help women after they've gone to that kind of phase? How do you get them out of that?
There's a lot involved in getting them out of that stage and kind of repairing their metabolisms. Um, and there's lots of things that can be disrupting their hormones, from gut imbalances to a high toxic load and inflammation and deficiencies and all sorts of things. But just going back to what you were saying about the exercise side of things, many of the women that come to me, they are so often really overdoing it when it comes to the intensity and the amount of exercise, because they're just trying to burn off as much as possible. And the thing is about this stage of life, when we're kind of more in our 40s and 50s, is your body is going through a massive transition, where essentially your ovaries are shutting down and stopping their production of sex hormones. And the adrenal glands, the stress glands, are starting to take over some of the production of those sex hormones. So your adrenals now have two jobs. They now need to also make your sex hormones as well as your stress hormones. Well, with your body being super adaptive, whenever it's under stress, your body is always going to prioritize making stress hormones over sex hormones, because it's much more important to your body to be able to respond to the effects of danger or famine, which are kind of the main types of stresses we would have had when we were cavemen. It's much more important for your body to be able to respond to that than it is to be able to reproduce. And we make all these hormones from the same raw material. So your body will scale down sex hormone production, scale up stress hormone production. And what that essentially means is that you're much less resilient to the effects of stress during this transition period and afterwards as well. And this high intensity exercise is very stressful on the body. When we're doing really intense exercise or we're doing prolonged cardio, then the body has a stress response to that. It's probably already got elevated stress hormones, because for most women at this stage of life, they're probably working full time, they've probably got kids, they're probably looking after aging parents, maybe going through divorces, bereavements. There's a lot going on at this stage of life. So you're already stressed, rushing about constantly. If you add in on top of that some very intense exercise several times a week, it's just going to make things worse. It's going to exacerbate that stress response, which causes a lot of inflammation in the body, disrupts your sex hormones, and ultimately all of that leads to insulin resistance, which is where we really can't get out of fat storage mode. So scaling back the exercise and doing not necessarily less, but doing more gentle, more kind of lower intensity exercise can be a real game changer.
I love that. I cannot wait to talk about exercise with you. I think that would be so helpful. You mentioned the stress hormone, cortisol, which, we all think like it needs to stay low and be low as possible. When really, just like any other hormone, there's times for it to be high. We just want it to be low at the right times. Just like every other
Mhm.
hormone, there's cycles and ups and downs. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but I've heard that this is where carbohydrate can be very, very helpful in the suppression of cortisol. Did I get that correct?
Yes. So when we exercise, particularly if it's intense, our cortisol levels tend to rise. That's a really normal thing to happen. The problem comes when it doesn't come back down again afterwards. And that is where the thing that tends to happen for women in this life stage. part of the reason why cortisol doesn't come back down or why it increases is because of the depletion of your glycogen stores or your sugar stores in your muscle. So having carbohydrate after a workout, particularly if it's more of a cardio focused workout, can help to drive down that cortisol level by replenishing those glycogen stores.
Gotcha. Okay. So I know this next question is so, again, very dependent and very highly individual, but a large contingent of our audience, for one reason or another, they got serious conditions like, say, bipolar. People that listen may have had gut issues or issues with oxalate problems, and for whatever reason have ended up in this world of a carnivore diet where they've eliminated pretty much all plant foods, and all that's on the table literally for them is animal products, and fats and proteins, and that comes with a lot of pros as far as like dealing with some of these things, but it also comes with some really serious cons, and it's really difficult to help women in particular coach around some of these things. I've seen it with my own wife being carnivore for a really long time, several years, but also still, in my opinion, probably over exercising, probably overdoing it, and seeing her add in some carbohydrate to kind of balance that back out and try to bring the cortisol back down. But then you also see women that, again, maybe somebody with bipolar is experiencing bipolar symptoms where they were strict carnivore and they weren't. It becomes this like tricky situation. How would you help somebody manage that? Would they be then, like, if literally carbohydrates were not the best option, would they be trying to get the stress down in every other part of their life to help like balance that out? And like, would that be a person you would say like you just really can't do intense exercise?
Potentially, I think you've got to look at the entire situation, look at the person in a holistic way, because food is just part of it. And like you say, stress is a big factor, and we need to look at everything that's going on. Are they sleeping properly? What type of exercise are they doing? Are they being exposed to toxins? What are the genetics saying? So looking at it as a whole helps you to come closer to the answer. But I think we probably don't know enough about the carnivore diet and its long-term impact to be able to say for sure what the best thing to do is. My concern with the carnivore diet is the lack of fiber and the impact on the gut microbiome. It's not with the animal products themselves, because I personally believe that good quality, grass-fed, pasture-raised, organic animal products are the most nutritious foods we can get, and we can get pretty much everything that we need from those foods. But there's so much research on the benefits of fiber and all the different types of fiber and all the antioxidants and polyphenols that we get from plants, that it is difficult to kind of balance that out.
Yeah,
But what I would
okay,
sorry, go
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was gonna say, what I would say for someone who's seen benefits from doing the carnivore diet, but then those benefits haven't lasted, and so they've had to tweak it. I would say that they haven't got to the root of the problem. And I think a lot of diets, whether it's someone going vegan to improve whatever issues that someone springs to mind who went vegan to address the psoriasis, or whether it's someone going carnivore to address gut issues, it's really still just addressing the symptoms, and it doesn't get to the root of the issue. So I would say we need to dig deeper to find out what's going on there.
Gotcha. I really appreciate that answer. I know people that the symptoms of what they're dealing with are so severe that they'll take whatever long-term effect happens on carnivore diet. And I understand that, but it's also very important, like you said, to be really nuanced about it and consider some of those other things. So I think that's really well said. I want to mention also not eating as part of nutrition. How have you found intermittent fasting as far as like helping people through different things? Do you find it's a good tool for somebody to use? And if so, who would you think would be a good candidate for it? And who would you say like, you probably shouldn't be doing this at this point?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought this up, because there's definitely people that need to be very cautious around it. There's loads of good research on fasting. It's important to note that most of it's been done on men rather than women, and women's bodies are very different to men's. The research that I've found has generally said that for men, it can help with weight loss, it can help with all the metabolic and cardiovascular markers. For women, it can help with those metabolic and cardiovascular markers, but it doesn't tend to help with weight loss. And that's the experience that I've had with my clients as well. What we tend to find is that fasting is another thing that can just be very stressful on the body. It's similar to overdoing the cardio. It's your body goes into like a stress response because of the lack of fuel and calories. But we do sometimes use fasting with our clients, but we don't ever bring it in until we've got a really solid foundation in place. Because if someone's very stressed, if their thyroid isn't functioning very well, fasting's probably going to make those things worse. Whereas if their thyroid is really well supported, they're taking steps to make sure that they're managing stress well, they're sleeping well, then fasting could be a really good tool to accelerate their progress. So I prefer to use it as a tool to accelerate things when they're going well, rather than as like a first strategy.
Perfect. Yeah, I totally agree with that. Let's talk about the exercise component. We've already kind of alluded to the fact that overdoing cardio is probably not the best idea. Tell us what would be a better alternative that you'd like to see more women do, that maybe they're a little bit averse to in the very beginning.
Yeah, strength training.
Thank you.
um, it's and not just, it's great to do yoga and Pilates and body weight exercises. That really helps, and there's definitely good research to show that it can make a difference. But I think lifting heavy is the thing that makes the real difference, because particularly if you already lost some muscle, which if you're after the age of 35 and you haven't been active for a while, you're probably going to have lost some muscle. So lifting heavy is what's going to help you to build muscle, and that is going to make a massive difference for you, because that's going to help build your metabolism.
On behalf of 100% of women I've ever suggested that to, and 100% of women you probably have ever suggested that to, the next question is, well, I don't want to lift heavy because I don't want to be bulky. Have you maybe gotten that question once or twice in your career?
Yes.
Every single time.
It's definitely something that women are concerned about. But here's the thing: people that get bulky, they tend to be very young, and they tend to be down the gym every day, and they're really chugging on their protein shakes and maybe a little bit more. It's very difficult to get bulky, particularly after the age of 35. I really wouldn't worry about it. And at the end of the day, if you put a little bit too muscle than you're happy with, you can just scale it back a little bit and the muscle will soon go. So it's really not something to worry about. It's never something that I've seen happen.
Yeah, me as well. I think it can be helpful. This is a gross oversimplification, but I think it would be really helpful if people like walk through the different parts of the gym where people tend to hang out and spend time, and look around and find the physique that you think you want to look like. And chances are, I think you're going to find it in the strength training section way more frequently than you're going to see it at the chronic cardio section. I think you can get so trapped by doing so much cardio all the time, and fixating on the calories that you burn, or doing the classes that are so they expend so much energy and have that lowering effect on your metabolism. I can't tell you how many times standing by a body fat scale back at the gym I used to work for, when women would come and step on the scale and it wouldn't change, the body fat would be the same, and they were so frustrated because they're working out all the time and like, why is the scale not moving? And it's like, well, did you want good workouts or did you want results? Because you're not doing the thing that's going to get you to where you think you want to go. You're doing a lot of work and getting some really sweaty workouts, but that's kind of about it. It's not correlated with the results you want.
Yeah. Yeah, and there definitely is a place for cardio, because we obviously want to keep our hearts healthy and keep our blood pumping. But I think the emphasis really needs to be much more on strength training and really having a mixture of different types of workouts. And I think for most, doing a combination of things like strength training, but also some stuff for flexibility and core strength and a little bit of cardio is probably a good mix.
I think that's totally reasonable. Speaking of the strength training, are there any like specific protocols or ways of doing things that you like? Or do you just think, generally speaking, if somebody is lifting weights, and you mentioned like lifting heavy weights, so challenging themselves to some extent, do you not really get too stuck in the weeds about actual like protocols or machines versus free weights or any of that stuff, as long as somebody is just simply doing strength training?
Yeah, I don't tend to get into the prescriptive side of things because it definitely does look different for everyone in terms of what they're going to enjoy, what they've got access to. So you've just got to find what works for you, and maybe that's getting some weights and doing some home videos or something like that. And you might not be lifting as heavy as you would be at the gym, but it's still going to make a difference.
That definitely seems to be kind of the trend in people that do a lot of the research. Like when I talked to Professor Stu Phillips in Canada, he researches strength training and protein. In the beginning, it sounded like it's this protocol, it's this much protein, it's this. You have to do the protein within the 45 minutes after the workout, or you're not going to get it in time. And over time, it just seems like more of these guys who are looking at this a lot are saying, strength train, eat protein, however you do it might matter a smidge, but doing it and being consistent with it is so much more important than however you decide to get there, whatever things you have available, like you mentioned. It seems like that's kind of becoming the main message, the main take home.
Yeah, I think oftentimes things get overcomplicated because they're trying to, get the peak performance. But actually, for your day-to-day person, it's all about being practical so that you can be consistent. And like you say, consistency will trump doing something perfectly, but only doing that occasionally because it's so impractical to do it all the time.
Yeah, totally. I think people get the idea that unless they have this like perfect plan, perfect machine, perfect at home thing, that they're not going to get the most optimal results. And it's like, look, you can go on Amazon and buy a $30 set of bands. You can wrap them around the banister of your stairs or around a tree and pull them and push them and do all kinds of stuff. And that might be completely adequate to get you good results. And so I like the idea of making it more accessible for more people rather than telling them you have to do it exactly this way with these machines at this time. It gets to be very impractical.
Yeah, definitely. And at the end of the day, doing something is always going to be better than doing nothing. And you're more likely to do nothing if you're stuck on this idea of trying to achieve this perfect workout.
Yeah, I love that. And when you say like lift heavy for most women, does that mean at the very least women should be kind of thinking about trying to get close to what we would call like failure, where like they're lifting to the point of like, this is very challenging. Maybe this isn't the absolute most you could ever do, but it's really tough.
Yeah, I believe so. Um, I mean, it's definitely not my area of expertise, but just from the research that I've done and where I've seen the results of clients, I think the ones that are, doing fewer reps but lifting to the point of failure, as opposed to, doing loads and loads of reps with lighter weights, they're the ones that seem to get the best results.
Yeah, I love that. We go back and think evolutionarily, and the way we dealt with energy, like we talked about earlier, your body would be abhorrent to adding, muscle mass and the bone density and better connective tissue because it will be using more calories, which is great for your metabolic rate, like we talked about earlier. Like it raises your metabolic rate. It's more area that you can depose carbohydrate into. So it's a better carbohydrate sink. But like when you go and lift a weight and it's your 3 sets to 12 and you were able to do it and you set the weight down, your body's really thinking like, okay, well, we were able to do that. We don't really need to get stronger. It's only when you kind of push up against that boundary of like,
Yeah.
wow, that was really challenging. I guess we have to shuttle resources into building muscle and making the bone stronger and the connective tissue and all that other stuff. So I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to think about it in terms of what makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. And I think that sums it up really well. And, I think for me, more recently, what motivates me more is thinking about aging well and, the effects of muscle loss as we get past really the age of 50, 60. The We know that it's greatly linked to longevity, not just living longer, but just having a better quality of life the more muscle mass we have, because we're more mobile, we will have better bone density, so we're going to be at lower risk of fractures. And it's really sometimes the end of the road when people start getting breaks and fractures. It
Totally.
changes your life massively. So just reducing the risk of that by working on your muscle mass can give you a much longer, healthier life.
Yeah, I've even seen recent research of women. I want to say, I probably get this wrong, but I want to say women in their like 60s and 70s doing deadlifts at, with appropriate coaching and an appropriate weight, but increasing their bone density and muscle mass. Even at that age, it's just never too late to start trying some of that stuff. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, I love it when I see those videos online.
Amazing.
It's so inspiring. And, another example of people who have been told that there's nothing that they can do is, women with osteoporosis. I can't tell you how often I've heard of women who have been told that they've got low bone density or osteoporosis, and they're told that, oh, well, you just got to be very careful and there's nothing that you can do. You've got to take this extremely toxic medication, and you've got to be on that for life. But actually there's so much that you can do, so it's very frustrating when you see that, but so inspiring when you see those amazing videos.
Totally. Yeah, it's so much more empowering to give somebody the message that there is something you could do as well. And yeah, it's never too late. Let's talk about some of the other lifestyle factors that you think are very important. I think more people are becoming aware of sleep hygiene and the negative effects of stress. I think the awareness is there, but the practicality around some of these things, it's like Netflix is still really good. It's still really addictive to stay up and binge watch episodes. One of my clients was totally dragging on our Tuesday morning workout because he was playing some game on his phone until like 11:30 p.m. And he was like, "What the hell am I doing? I've just been playing on this stupid game I don't even like for like 2 hours." So
Mm.
again, I think people understand it, but actually doing it, taking steps to reduce stress or get better sleep. Practically speaking, how are you able to help your clients with some of that stuff?
I think it's important to understand the impact of this dopamine addiction that we all have, and really trying to get dopamine highs in other ways, which can be really simple things like setting a timer and trying to clean up the kitchen before the timer goes off, and then if you achieve it, you get this dopamine high because you've achieved your goal. So it's just trying to get wins in other ways, because we are absolutely rinsing our dopamine with scrolling and gaming and watching things and just being in front of the screens constantly. And then that just drains our motivation, it impacts our sleep and our energy, and really leads us to this downward spiral. So I think just becoming really conscious of that. I think most people are aware of it, but I think really tuning into it and making a decision that you're going to try and move away from using screens as much. And that can be, putting apps on your phone that monitor your activity and give you warnings and that sort of thing. And trying to avoid screens for a few hours before bed. It's easier said than done, but bringing in other things, other habits, are really the best way to do it. Try to crowd out some of these less helpful habits with healthier habits, which could be something like just reading a book, and getting into a really good book. And or it might be that you need to get things in place that help you to commit to other habits. So it's a slightly different example, but for me, one of the things that I've wanted to commit to very recently is making sure that I walk for an hour every day. And I've always had that goal, but it's something that I've not been doing as much as I would like, or just not walking as long. So I've made sure that I've downloaded a load of audiobooks that I'm really into, and now I want to walk because I want to listen to the audiobook for longer, and it's helped me to hit that goal. So sometimes we've kind of got to get a few things in alignment to set us up for success.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think switching that dopamine response can be very, very helpful. Again, not very easy practically to do that, but walking is a great example. Getting out during the day in the sunlight, having something in your ears that you can listen to, like what an amazing habit that feels like a chore in the beginning, but the more you do it, the more it is just so enjoyable. And yeah, I think that's a wonderful thing. So you found that it's kind of same for you, like you've wanted to do it for a long time, but now that you've been doing it, do you find it one of your favorite parts of the day?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was making excuses to not do it before. I was like, oh, it's raining, or it's a bit cold today, or I don't want to get the dog all dirty. But now I'm just doing it, and I love it. I look forward to it. I enjoy listening to my audiobook, And I enjoy ticking it off my habit tracker that I have on my phone and seeing that I've got like a 2 week streak of going out every day for an hour. And that's kind of where I get my dopamine hit from, is that activity tracker.
Yeah, those trackers can be so motivating. It's why I've got streaks with meditation using my silly little Calm app or my Duolingo, checking that off every single day, studying another language. You get a streak going and you want to keep that going. So I think that's very, very helpful. Speaking of getting outside and bedtime, light manipulation, have you found anything to be very helpful as far as light manipulation, either, you know, bright lights during the day and kind of getting the lights down later on at night? You mentioned screen time. What other hacks have you found as far as like light manipulation can be really helpful for someone?
Yeah, this is definitely really important because we're really messed up when it comes to the light exposure, particularly in the winter. Um, so getting outside first thing in the morning, I think is really, really helpful. If it's not a sunny day, then you can get those light therapy lamps, which emit a wavelength of light that is basically the same as sunlight. So if you expose yourself to that first thing in the morning, then it mimics the sunlight, and that helps to break down the melatonin in your brain and improve the serotonin in your brain. So that helps to really reset your circadian rhythm, and it will mean that it's easier to get to sleep in the evening because your melatonin, your serotonin are where they need to be. So first thing in the morning, get an exposure to daylight, and then as the sun goes down, just being really mindful of light levels and turning down the lights where possible. If you're using a screen, enable the blue light filters. You can get blue blocker glasses, and then where possible, just trying to avoid screens on your approach to bedtime. And another thing that I found really, really helpful, which is so obvious, and I've always known it to be true, but you just kind of get into bad habits, is when I can't sleep, instead of putting on a video or scrolling, just picking up a book and reading. And usually within 5 minutes, I'm really sleepy. So just things like that, that we know we probably should do, really do make a big difference.
Yeah, I love that. A book sounds so boring after watching Drive to Survive on Formula One on Netflix or whatever. But yeah, it's wonderful. And you're right, it can really help relax the mind and get you to sleep much faster. And I loved the way you explained the serotonin and melatonin. Again, these hormones have times when they need to be high and they need to be low. You don't want your melatonin low as you're starting your day. You want to be awake and alert. And that's the time to go get that big, bright sunlight. And it's like a
Mm,
pendulum. Like the harder it swings one way, the harder it's going to swing the other way. Get the light during the day, get the light out at night as much as possible. Like I think there's even like an argument for like the directionality of the light, like having low reddish lights at night that are
mm.
low on the horizon versus light that is up above you. I think that can make a big difference for people. And I've heard those light lamps make a huge difference. I've not tried that yet, but I've heard they're amazing, especially in the wintertime, and especially with
Yeah.
people that just don't have the option of getting out very much during the day.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. If you can't get out first thing in the morning, or if you're unfortunately someone who it's dark when you go to work and it's dark when you come home from work, then definitely using one of these light lamps, even if it's just while you're doing your makeup or if it's while you're having your breakfast, if you can find 5, 10 minutes to sit down and be in front of it, or have it at your desk at work, whenever, as soon as you can, but whenever you can do it will help. Yeah, it can make a really big difference.
Yeah, I love that. And also said like yes, there's a lot of people out there that really don't have the option of getting outside, but I still believe there's so many people that really could make it a priority the way that you did. Yeah, it's cold. Yeah, it's raining. But you could probably set up one of your meetings to be like a walking meeting outside, or maybe you could take a lunch break and do that outside. Like there are some steps that some people can take, and if it's a priority, you'll find a way to do it. You'll get it done. So just be thinking about your day and like, maybe I could talk to my manager about doing something outside during the day. There are steps that some people can take. I think that again, most people, some people can't, but a lot of people could.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think, like you say, it comes down to priorities, and sometimes it can feel like you can't. But actually, if you have a bit of creative thinking and think outside the box a little bit, then you could restructure things even just a little bit to just align things a little bit more towards your health and your goals.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. This has been an amazing conversation with lots of really good practical tips. I am aware that you have lots of different programs and ways that you are helping people. Like I said, I really love your podcast. I think that's a wonderful resource that we both do and put out for free for people that they can always go and find and get really good information. How are you working with your people these days? Like how do you kind of help get your clients to your goals? What kinds of things do you offer?
Yeah, well, the main way that I work with my clients is through my program, the Nourish Method. And it's a program where we run tests and we work with people one to one, as well as having kind of group resources as well, so that we can really make sure that we dig down to their specific imbalances that are keeping them stuck and impacting their weight management, and really give them as much support and guidance as they could possibly need during that 6 months that they're working with us. So that's the main way and my favorite way to work with people. I also have various other resources like an ebook, and I run a masterclass each month. And they're all very easy to find by going on my Instagram, which is at Louise Digby Nutrition, or going on my website, which is louisedigbynutrition.com.
Excellent. Well, that's fantastic. We'll link all of that in the notes for sure. Have you found the group component of things to be very, very, I would say like underrated and very helpful for people? Like when people are able to support each other or people that are at different places in their journey, some people, that are just starting out getting help from somebody that's maybe been in the program for a few months. Have you found that to be an amazing resource as well?
Definitely. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people think that they don't want it and they don't like the idea of kind of group related things. But actually, it's an amazing resource because there's only so much that you can do one to one, particularly if you're on a budget. But the group aspect means that you get a whole wealth of wisdom and support from like-minded people who are on the same journey as you, people that can share recipes or answer questions or just give you some moral support. If they're further along in their journey than you, they've likely been where you are, and they can offer some really helpful wisdom to keep you moving along. So yeah, I definitely find it invaluable.
Yeah, we don't offer any group options at the moment where we are, and it's something that I really miss and something that was really, again, kind of underrated, underappreciated when we were doing it because the message sounds like one thing when it's coming from me, but it's when it's coming from everybody else in the community and they're helping each other, it's totally different and sounds way more approachable, and people feel like they get a lot more support. So it's really cool that you offer that.
Yeah, I like that we have this kind of hybrid approach where we have one to one, we have like group drop in sessions, and we have a community forum like a Facebook group, so that really people can get support whenever they need it.
Yeah, that's great. Louise, this has been an awesome conversation. I know you mentioned it already, but where can people go to find you and connect with you and your work just one more time?
So on Facebook and Instagram, if you search at Louise Digby Nutrition, you'll definitely find me there, and on YouTube as well. And then my website is louisedigbynutrition.com. And I also forgot to mention that for my ebook, I have a 50% off discount code that I can give your listeners. And we can just make it your name, Casey.
Oh,
So if
excellent.
they just type that in, then they'll get 50% off.
Ah, thank you so very much. I will be sure to add that to the show notes. It's very kind of you. And yeah, this has been an amazing conversation. I really love your insights. Again, could take this full circle. It is a little bit frustrating when the answer to a lot of these things is often it depends, but that's why people like you are here in the world to help kind of govern and help people decide like how to make their choices and take steps to improve their health and their hormones. So thank you so very much for taking the time to be on our show today. We really, really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really great chatting with you.
It's been a great chat for sure. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.